Week 1 of Division 1 shook the hierarchy as Maryville, Winthrop, and other giants faced unexpected resistance. The takeaway? Even the kings can bleed. Tonight, we'll break down the biggest matches, the stats behind the surprises, and what it means heading into Week 2. It is episode 1 of Tilt Proof League of Legends edition. Welcome, everybody. My name is Grapes, joined alongside Alk Battery here. We had our intro last week on a Tilt Proof where we previewed both the League of Legends and the Valorant sections. Those shows will now be separating off into two. So if you want your Valorant fix, you can go check out the Valorant episode over on the YouTube channel, or stay right here for League of Legends. Or hey, why not watch both of them here? Both will be releasing
Ooh.
at the same day every week. And we had a fun first week of Division 1 as we got our first look at a lot of the teams. 6 of the 8 played their first matches.
We're already doing great because I somehow was able to duplicate the amount of league hosts on the show.
True.
I was the only one last week, so I'm glad that I have at least a little bit of a bit of more of a gang here on the show. There's only two of us here, and hopefully we can get a little bit more as the season goes on. But last week was both surprising, and if you looked at only results, I think not too experimental. Like everybody who we thought would win, unless you're Gordo, ended up actually making it out. Some of the series were maybe a little bit closer, but even by that standard, I think that the only real close match was that marquee one that we had.
Yeah, if you just looked at the results down the board, not too much, but it really is the content in each game that has us kind of wondering about what the league is going to look like going forward. So again, make
Mhm.
sure to stay tuned here on Tilt Proof for the rest of the season. We'll be here every week with a rotating cast of all your favorite League of Legends esports personalities in the collegiate space. But let's start things off, Alk, with some recaps of the games. The audience and the fans here are most excited to hear us talk about the big matchup that everybody was hoping for, a matchup between two of our finals favorites, that being Maryville and Winthrop University. We saw a very similar Winthrop roster, the same old that they've been running with for a while, but we got our first look at a new look, Maryville University, fresh off of a CLOL championship, and they end up taking the series 2-1. Overall, what are your first initial thoughts going off of this series?
Well, so one, I came in thinking that Winthrop were going to be a lot softer because according to at least our sheets, and this may have been something that we need to just change as we go forward, we thought Rapid was going to be starting. Wilson is still the starting jungler. So Wolkow or Wasal that you saw on the screen, that player seems like he's still doing fine and he's going to be the starter. We'll see how long that ends up being for and whether or not we might actually see any appearances of Rapid, because similar to Maryville, I think if we are going to have changes going into 2026 for the collegiate landscape, I think you need to be starting to get games in now. You do not want to have to start your spring and potential summer splits having to integrate a new player into the lineup. And something like Div 1 here in fall is the perfect time to get both the competitive stage games out of the way and to hopefully hamper down on what identity we're going to see from these two teams. Because moving on to their opponents, Maryville, we did a lot of glazing for them last week. We got a whole 10-minute segment for both League of Legends and Valorant about the prestige and how highly rated this team was going to be or this program was going to look. And so far, one series overreaction. This team might be top 8. I don't know if they're able to win it all quite yet.
Well, top 8 in Division 1, certainly, because there's only 8
Yes.
teams. But if you're talking
Oh
about
yeah.
CELO as a whole, definitely, it's still in that conversation. It is interesting to note that all 5 players that competed for Maryville against Winthrop were different from the roster that ended up finishing first place in collegiate last year. So a lot of turnover. However, the players on that roster, very skilled, obviously. Crimson, Music, Toasty, Scary Jerry making his return to the university alongside Cryogen. A mix of some veterans like Scary Jerry and Music and some of the newer exciting players that we have here in the North American League of Legends space. And while we did definitely see some growing pains, specifically in that game too, where Winthrop really ran away with it, most notably off of mobility in the bottom lane, having 13 kills on Lucian, leading the team in damage and CS numbers. This is definitely an MU that is going to be vulnerable, especially at the start of the season. And we saw that with, some good moments from Winthrop University.
I really think that this series was really, really dominated by which jungler actually was able to kind of exert themselves in the game. Obviously, game two, Wilson on Vi, just watching him in his early jungle pathing. Music was on this Jarvan where, yes, he's up like 4 or 5 camps, but it doesn't matter because Wilson is playing the map. And I think a big portion of why Winthrop were able to win game two was watching some of the mid game plays come in from Maryville. And we'll kind of touch on this as we get further on into the show, and maybe we'll see what the evolution of this looks like during the season. But I really do think that Scary Jerry, with all of the hype coming back in, did have a very slow start to this series. The Corky game, I think, mechanically wasn't great. That game two, Kaisa, there was a ton of misclicks. There's a fight around bottom lane where I know I had clipped it in our group chat of just like him flying in on the Kaisa, but there's another one where he's trying to kill mobility and he auto attacks a Chemtech plant. Like, I expect a lot more from Jerry, and I think the community should as well. A player that originally was kind of the lone star on a collegiate Converse roster, then moves over to Maryville and has a lot of really exciting plays when we see him with playing with Zyko. Once they kind of got that 2v2 together, it's going to be a learning and kind of a growing pain here, him learning alongside Cryogen and coming back down into this level. Hopefully I can see that Jerry that a lot of us had such high hopes for.
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for Scary Jerry overall, going from the LTA North to the NACL to now back here in Division One competing with
Mhm.
Maryville University. One last thing about this roster, I really like how the fact that they can kind of play around any role. Crimson, Toasty, and Scary Jerry all have the potential to 1v9, and having a jungler as flexible and as prominent of a leader as Music is going to be very important for them moving forward. But obviously very vulnerable. And shout out to Winthrop for making it a very competitive series to kick off our
Mhm.
Division One season. Let's move on to some other teams and games that ended up actually featuring some teams that we could potentially be excited about going forward in terms of going on some deep playoff runs. Stony Brook took a 2-0 win over Boise State. And a big factor in that is their superstar support in Keatung. This guy is always going to be a big part of Stony Brook's wins. We saw it in last season's matches across their various leagues, and definitely going to be a big factor here in Division One.
Now, we came into this matchup and we're like, okay, this should just be Boise State getting smashed. And the over under that I put on Boise coming into the season was 0.5 over under on game wins because they are by and far away the least experienced team on the line in all of the 8 teams here in Division 1, and the program strength just isn't quite there for League of Legends. I think we saw that reflected here in this series. Like, yes, Keatung is drawing 3 bans every single game: the Karma, the Lulu, the Soraka, which are champions that he's known for historically. But like the Shaco, the J4 pick, I don't think were like amazing, like completely splashed out this game. We saw Stony Brook in both of these games. They respected jungle timers. They knew when and where they could find leads. And I feel like this was mostly Stony Brook kind of taking advantage of their opponents, which is to be expected here in this matchup.
Yes, 2 very one-sided wins, which perhaps could be expected, but also definitely something to, keep an eye out for what they can do maybe against a higher level opponent like an Ohio State, a St. Clair, a Winthrop, or even a Maryville.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Stony Brook have some pretty good performances last year, although a couple of their roster spots have swapped around going into this Division 1 season. As for Boise, obviously a very underexperienced roster compared to the remainder of the teams, but I really like some of the unique picks and drafts that they ended up going with. I know that we got the chance, both of us all, to talk to Kelsey Moser, who is their head coach over at Boise,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that they had a couple of players like their mid laner, the Cake, who originally came on as an AD carry player. We saw him flex that muscle a little bit, playing a Twitch in game number 2. So love to see some creativity here, especially when you're a team that is looking to play an upset here in Division 1.
There were moments where I think Boise can still be proud. I think game 1, their jungler had a decent time at least being able to move around the map and contest Hydro multiple times. The Twitch mid, as you're mentioning, I think the theory behind it is really sound, and you have a lot of abilities to play make. Just the map fell apart really, really quickly. And I do want to give a shout out to their AD carry. I think the fact that his name is Paint Liquor is very hilarious to me, but he also, I think, put 2 games forward that if this team can stabilize some of the lanes, if they can just play around objectives just a little bit cleaner, I think they can have much closer games than what we saw here this last weekend.
Yeah, definitely have the opportunity to play upset and then, potentially improve as the season goes on as well. I'll have an interesting question for you about Stony Brook as we get later onto the show off. But for now, let's
Okay.
move on to our last matchup of week one, where Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, taking down the University of Utah 2-0. I think that the biggest thing to say about this game here, Alk, is that both teams went with multiple different iterations of their starting lineups. Different players swapping in both the jungle role and the AD carry role for Ohio State. And we saw a lot of different looks, but overall it was still OSU taking it pretty handily.
Yeah, and part of that I think might have been reflected in the post-game interview that we got with Five Fire, the mid laner for OSU, talking about the fact that a lot of this lineup is seniors. So they want to try to get the highest level, especially for Five Fire. I think kind of taking a leadership position on this role, kind of the fact that he has had so much experience playing in tier 2 and in tier like just playing in like academy level games. Like it is the senior year for a lot of these guys. So not only maybe trying to take them a little bit further than what we saw from them in the collegiate championship this last year, but uh, I think it is really key for them, and probably something that we'll see a little bit more of is just getting as many stage games for these guys as possible, especially because again, fall season I think is a perfect warm up going into 2026.
Yeah, you're going to get the chance to play all of these teams again in the second round robin once the spring
Yeah.
semester starts. And so using this opportunity, especially for Ohio State's sake, against a Utah team that is perceived to be a little bit weaker going into the start of the season, getting some different looks. For me, 5150 is the more familiar AD carry player. He's one who played with them during CLOL of 2024 or 2025, I should say. But getting a look out of who is it, Ruler, which is a hilarious name to be paired alongside Delight, is a really
Yeah.
good opportunity for them as well. And they've been part of the rosters for a number of years together, but now getting a chance to see both of them definitely is an exciting prospect. Do you have any thoughts about this Utah roster and what you saw from them after just this first series? Because to me, they're a little bit of a wild card of whether we should consider them to be in the middle of the pack of Division One or maybe towards the bottom.
Well, they're definitely not at the bottom because that's where Boise State is supposed to be. But if you were to only look, I think this Utah team, it's one series. I think they weren't favorites coming into this series either. So, like realistically, where would I put them? I would probably see that this Utah team is probably going to be fighting somewhere between fifth and sixth. Like they're the most important matchup probably this series, this entire season is probably going to be up against West Virginia, who is a team that I think is probably closer to them in skill level. I feel like, as we've talked about during the show, like that the pack in the middle is really going to be important. So OSU getting a win here is really, really good. But what Utah, West Virginia, and Stony Brook are able to do to each other is more going to have an impact as we get closer to playoffs, and probably give us the best indicator as to who that fifth, sixth, seventh is.
Yeah, I definitely think Utah currently is more in that West Virginia tier than the Stony Brook tier, but just given this matchup, we'll see what it looks like moving forward. I guess my question to you, which you might have partly answered yourself before we head on to our next section, is who do you like more in that fourth place position? If you want to split this league up into a top half and a bottom half between Stony Brook and Ohio State, who both 2-0'd their opening matches.
Wait, you're telling me Stony Brook? I'm getting hostage with these two teams.
Well,
I
if you
can't
think
put
it's
St.
somebody
Clair
else,
fourth.
well, if you think it's St. Clair fourth, then you got to put somebody else at third. So who do you think is third?
Oh, you're right. You know what? You're right. I think it is OSU fourth. I think I'm putting OSU fourth.
Okay.
I think having the big splashy player be in mid versus support, where we got to talk with Dancing in the BL afterwards, and we're like, hey, so did you guys talk about the Shaco and the Jarvan support? And they're like, no, Keatong just kind of said just pick it. No, just we're just putting these champions in the support position because it's funny. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. So I think I trust Aiden a little bit more to carry me over the line and put them at fourth.
I'm going to disagree. I'm going to say Stony Brook is right now the
Ooh.
fourth best team in Division 1 just because of the versatility they can bring from that support position. I got to see what Stony Brook did all of last year with Keatong in the East Conference of CLOL. He was really putting the team on his back, and he had some other really solid pieces around him in this opening matchup against Boise State. I'm going to be rooting for them. Also, no bias as I am from the New York area. So
I was
that
gonna
is
say,
also
not
part of the
only
reason
that,
that
but
we'll be supporting them here.
I would just like to ask Grapes, what conference does Ohio State play in?
Well, right now they're in Division 1, but last year they were in the MEC.
It's okay. That's true. They played
I
in well.
I gotta
Stony
root
Brook
for
don't
my
play
I
in the
gotta root
most
for my East
competitive
Coast.
East, but
I gotta root for my East Coast boys here a little bit
all
here. So
right, all
I'll
right.
have Stony Brook leading the charge for now, but obviously still a lot of this season to play. Let's talk about some standout players though. Overall, the matches and the results are important, but also seeing the individual performances from some of the finest League of Legends players we have in the collegiate space is an important one to watch as well. The obvious place to go right away is the Maryville versus Winthrop game. I think the bot laners
Mhm.
definitely really stood out, particularly on Winthrop's side, where you mentioned some of the struggles that Scary Jerry had in his debut. A lot of that could be attributed to what Mobility was able to offer, as he's had a great last couple of years and really has a good opportunity to take things to a next level here with Winthrop.
I think Maryville and Winthrop is such an interesting story going into 2026 because it feels now like with the move from seeing multiple different teams kind of shake out. I'm hearing some potential rumors about what's happening across the space in some of our top 8 teams that we saw for 2026. And for Jerry and Mobility, I think it's really important to see what these two players look like going into the year because Mobility always feels like bridesmaid slash never crowned, maybe has taken part of the Winthrop like chip on their shoulder of no one ever thinks we're going to win anything, especially when it comes to the collegiate championship. And for a long time, I think some of the Mobility's storyline has been tied to other players. So Mobility versus Shogo has been a lineup or has been a rival we've been talking about for a while. I think Mobility versus Scary Jerry is something that always tends to stand out. Mobility had the league high creep score in one of the games at 318. When you look at CS per minute and CS generated between these two guys right now, Mobility is first, Jerry is second, and then one of Mobility's teammates, Sword, is third in CS per minute, which I think is really, really impressive for having carry positions. But I think in the series we got to see that I think Mobility played 3 good games versus Jerry, and I think Jerry maybe got 1.5. And that is really important for not only Mobility trying to have a breakout year, maybe see him pick up a trophy, but also for Jerry, who we have, again, lots of expectations for as now a former LTA player and someone who is literally coming off of, I think, one of the best years in his career, just across the board in tier 2 and tier 3.
I feel like always the story for Mobility is, what can he do to also not only do good stuff for himself, but also set up the rest of his team. And I think in that
Mhm.
game 2 specifically, we really saw not just Mobility stand out, but as you said, the rest of the team also take things to another level. Obviously, Denethor is a highly regarded prospect that we've been talking about for many years, but Wilson on the Vi going 12-2-12, we definitely have to give him some flowers for that
Oh,
performance
yeah.
as well. A big reason why the early game was so explosive and giving Winthrop that win overall. Outside of the Maryville versus Winthrop matchup, though, Ohio State also had a great set of games against Utah. And we take a look at the KDA leaderboard, positions 2, 3, and 4 are all occupied by players from the Ohio State. Sigma Kid 49, Ruler, who again only played that one game, and then Chelush, the support, I believe, getting that other award down there for the side of Ohio State. So I guess overall, what were your thoughts? Or sorry, the jungler, I should say, who went 12-1-3 on Wukong in their first
It's
game
not
matchup.
fair, man. They got one game. Like
That
some
is
of these
true.
players only played
That
a
is true.
single game in their series. This is the ultimate stat padding for them. If they don't play another game, they can literally just ride out and just say like, I had the highest KDA in all of Div 1, and there's no punishment for that. There's no way we can punish them for only playing one game. They're playing against Utah. I think it is really important that we see OSU do well here in this group, especially against the lower end teams that we're talking about. Like, if OSU is going to be a fourth here, they need to take strong games. And what that looks like when you're having a revolving door of a roster can, lead to instability in their gameplay. So I kind of want to get another series, especially looking forward. They're going to be playing up against Boise State. So in my mind, another scheduled win. We'll see if we can get a Boise upset some point in the series season. But for just the Ohio State guys, I think I'm not like super impressed. I think a series that unfortunately didn't get to watch due to a reschedule on West Virginia's end was that series versus St. Clair. If you look at the lane stats right now, if you look at CS difference and like goal difference at 15, Flocon and Lig, the mid and 80 carry for St. Clair, are immediate standouts. Lig played Draven and Callista, and his average goal difference is 1,500 at 4 minutes at 15 minutes. That is absolutely insane. And Flocon, he pulled out a Zeri and an Aurora game. Now the Aurora is probably not as surprising, but getting the Zeri there, very, very good. I think if there is ever a time for St. Clair to, maybe start to ramp up, and I feel like this team is a bit emotional sometimes, that is the best way for you to ramp into the season.
It's definitely unfortunate that we didn't get to see that St. Clair match broadcasted on stream due to a reschedule, but obviously we will see much more about these of this team, and always a little bit of an interesting situation to look at the stats after just 1 week, and particularly for Ohio State's players, just one game. Real quick question about Ohio State before we move on to our last feature. How long do you think it is worth it to continue to rotate these players back and forth? Because in my opinion, I'd say after the first round robin, unless you like have a very specific strategy difference between the two junglers or the 280 carries, I'd like to settle in on a starting 5 just to make sure that you're able to fully get that synergy together.
I would say probably last like 3 or 4 weeks, you probably want to lock in the roster. The first 3, again, your next schedule, like if we go ahead and look at the schedule, next week, Ohio State are going to be playing Boise, which I just expect to be a schedule win. You can really put whatever 5 you want, and you're going to get a free win there. After that, Ohio is going to play against Winthrop. That'll probably be one of their more marquee matchups that we'll see in the season. So if there is a chance that we get to see like more of an experimentation, I think it is just going to be in the first half of the season of the regular season for sure.
Our last feature goes to Maryville University, where obviously with some new players comes some big questions, especially when they did not sweep the series against Winthrop like maybe some people expected them to. Overall, Alk, are you worried about how lack of a dominant performance it was from Maryville, or are you expecting them to ramp up nice and fine going into 2026 and beyond?
I mean, this is a team that in theory has 3 lanes that can carry in the games. Like Crimson has had moments when we've seen him on his like marquee team or franchise team of CCG. We've seen him be able to have some good success. Music is very obviously a manager just for this team. You have some pretty big voices, especially for someone like Jerry. And then looking across the roster, Alex, I think had an okay series going into Sword. There was moments where I think Sword outplayed him, but this is a lineup that should be expected to be dominant as we get more games. I think the ceiling of this roster is really high. It's just if we can tap into that. And probably for Maryville, a big word we're going to have is potential. Is the potential of someone like Crimson going to be realized? I think the pedigree of top laners that we have seen from Maryville in the last forever has been really, really high, especially for collegiate standards. So are we going to get the most out of this player? And is Coach Nas going to be able to get that from him? We'll see. We've seen it before, obviously, with Zamudo. And can Alex be what Spyrax was or even better? That is going to be really important for this team. I think Alex has always been a player that we or Toasty that we as a broadcast or we as talent looking at from other series or other spaces have a lot of hope for this guy as the next future, as one of the future mids to potentially represent all of North America.
Yeah, we didn't get to see much of Toasty throughout 2025 just because he was a sub on the Maryville roster for Spyrax, who again has such a legendary pedigree in the collegiate space, as you mentioned. So very excited to see him finally step into that starting role with Spyrax currently, at least for this semester, listed as a substitute player. But I really agree with you that the build is set up nicely for Maryville, where they can play around any 3 of their lanes, and all 3 of them have the potential to be a big carry and 1v9, especially led with music potentially sending
Mhm.
resources down towards them. It's very different than previous iterations of this roster, like ones with Zamudo, where they would always play on the top side, or even go back to like the Niles Odd Orange days, where still top side was such a big focus. Crimson obviously can play that role, but I love that Toasty and now Scary Jerry can now also step into that carry position. Big question for me is how quickly it'll all come together here for Maryville, because from in my opinion, this is going to be the best opportunity for a team to, pull off an upset, do the quote unquote
Oh yeah.
unthinkable against who many of us perceive to be one of the strongest programs that we have in the collegiate space. Winthrop came very close to doing it last week. And, as we get into our match previews for week number 2, we'll ask you the question here, Alk. Maryville get a matchup against St. Clair College, who you were hyping up a little bit after their win against West Virginia. Do you think that Maryville has a chance to get upset by the boys from Ontario?
I think it is highly likely that there will be one game that is just bot gap. Like we're gonna see Lig and the rest of this team hopefully step it up. For St. Clair, they've always had a tough time, I think, of being able to get some of their lanes together. I know last year it was a talk about the solo lanes. Can Flocon and Sama really work together? We didn't see that. It kind of fell apart towards the end of the collegiate championship. But now that we're seeing this new lineup for them, and specifically again, the fact that Lig is playing more of that aggressive bot lane that we know him for from solo queue and from collegiate, I think there's a very real possibility that we could see him versus Scary Jerry as a highly volatile matchup, especially with the way these two guys like to play. The fact that we've seen Scary Jerry in the past be someone that really demands a lot from his support or requires them to play a little bit up in the lane. CryoGen did a very good job, especially in their Nico game, of providing that. But unfortunately, that was one of the losses that we did see from them. And if there's ever a time for St. Clair to take a win against an unexpected Titan, it will have to be this early in the season, because I think St. Clair have very visible flaws from what we saw from them last year that I don't think are necessarily band-aided by this year's changes.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what the starting roster for St. Clair looks like going into this matchup against Maryville, because Alonzo played in that last game, in that last series,
Mhm.
in the jungle position. Normally, Maddie is somebody who steps up in that role, who I think is a really good facilitator for this team, who has such explosive carries in Flocon and Lig. If he's back in, then I think maybe St. Clair have an opportunity to take at least a game, because, as we mentioned, these guys have been playing together for a very long time. This core of Ricky, Maddie, Flocon, Lig, and Miracle. This is the same roster running it back. Very similar situation to Winthrop from last year. So if they
Mhm.
can maybe use that experience together to get an edge over the Maryville players, who we think are highly skilled but maybe need a little bit more time forming things, I'm going to predict that St. Clair take a game. I won't predict them, though, to win the series. My final prediction will be Maryville 2-1.
There we go. There we go. We're in the same boat again. Wouldn't be a Div 1 tilt proof if we didn't glaze Maryville. Okay, it's just
The
I've
players are too
checked my
good, man.
PayPal. They are very good. That is true. It turns out turns out when you're a program that attracts nationwide acclaim in at least both of the programs that we have here at Div 1, turns out you're going to be pretty good.
Absolutely. There's a reason they won CLOL and CVAL in 2025. Now looking to hoist that double championship in Division 1 as well. Let's take a look at some of the other matchups that we have going in week number 2. Ohio State takes on Boise State in, again, a matchup that you call maybe a scheduled win. But I guess the question is for you all, how dominant can this victory be for Ohio
2-0.
State so they can,
Bro,
get off to that 2-0 start?
we can move to our quick we can move on to other matchups very quickly. I just think that BSU should not be at all competitive. We literally saw in game 2 of Stony Brook versus Boise that at 16 minutes it was already an 8,000 gold lead and we had Dancing Shelly. There is no reason, I think, for this series to be competitive. I'm expecting Ohio State to absolutely clap Boise, and Boise will see you in week 3. Get ready for them. I just want to look at our future matchups coming up very quickly. Next week, we're going to have Stony Brook versus West Virginia, Utah versus Winthrop, St. Clair and Maryville, as we discussed, and again, Boise versus Ohio. The closest ones for me immediately stand out. Probably going to be this St. Clair versus Maryville, and maybe Stony Brook versus West Virginia. Unfortunately, this is going to be my one pledge. Whoever is over there at West Virginia, whoever is in charge of the Twitch channel, whoever has access to it, please publish the VODs. We would love to watch the game. Yeah, it makes it hard to talk about whether or not your team is good, especially when I look at the stats and I see that your 80 carry is going down 1,500 gold on average. Not good.
It's against Lig. Well, what are you gonna say? He's a very, very strong
Yeah.
player there on St. Clair. I think that the other series will all go 2-0 is my predictions. I'll have Stony
Okay.
Brook taking it over West Virginia. I'll have Winthrop over Utah. Maryville 2-1 over St. Clair, and then Ohio State 2-0 over Boise. I guess real quick, let's hear your thoughts fully down the line in terms of your pick'ems for week 2.
I think I have to copy you, except I don't. The things from Stony Brook that I didn't like is they kind of got sucked into some of the madness and they got a lot of freebies. So it's hard to tell what their poise is going to be looking like. And again, I have not watched any West Virginia games because it was at the same time as our Boise State series, which I was casting. So couldn't multi-stream it. I hope that we can get to see a little bit of tape from them. And I agree. I probably agree with your pickups. I think it's 2-0 across the board outside of the St. Clair and Maryville one, where I do expect that St. Clair will be able to find one game.
Okay, so we're pretty much aligned here going into week number 2. I'm really excited for the moments that us here on Tilt Proof are going to have some disagreements and then we can argue for one of our teams over the other. Looks
Oh
like so
yeah.
far, though, we are pretty much aligned. Real quick, before we head out, give me one player that you have your eyes on going into this week 2. It could be from any of the matchups that we have already previewed.
Um, I want to see what Fire looks like. Like Fire, you're gonna have a decent time into the cake. I want to see if OSU and what that lineup is going to be able to pull off. I did say it was a scheduled win, but the cleanliness of these wins is going to be important to me, and especially if we're having this like in and out substitution roster, like what is actually the difference between all of these players?
I'm going to go with Flocon here for St. Clair,
Okay.
going up against Toasty of Maryville University. I feel like in a similar way to how we talk about Toasty throughout his early career in the in the amateur and the tier 2 spaces, Flocon's been that for me in the collegiate spaces where he's been kind of under the radar for a little bit, but a newer player. He's been around now for at least a few years at this point. But I thought last year had a great season on St. Clair and obviously showed us a lot more than what Toasty was able to do on Maryville because Toasty didn't get to play very much for
Oh
Maryville. And
yeah.
so
True.
in terms of just counting stats for the CLO season, I would have to give it to Flocon. But seeing what he can do, especially with some of the unique picks and matchups that he likes, going into Toasty is going to be something that I have my eyes on. You talked about the Zeri mid. He's able to whip out a lot of different things in that position. The assassins, the control mages, the facilitators. And so
The
for me,
Vladimir mid. I can't wait.
exactly. If we see a Vladimir against Maryville, who knows? Maybe that'll be enough for them to pull off the upset. So lots to look forward to, of course, and that's going to do it for our first League of Legends specific episode of Tilt Proof here on Division 1. Thank you so much to everybody who's watching. Again, you'll see episodes with the rotating cast every single week for both League of Legends and Valorant. And of course, make sure to tune into the games that'll be taking place on Sundays and Mondays on twitch.tv/Division1Val and twitch.tv/Division1LOL. On behalf of our producer, Froggo, and Alk by my side here, my name is Grapes. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all this weekend for the games.